My father had grown up a musician. My uncle had grown up musicians here. My grandfather played in a big band in Nashville in the 20s and 30s. And that was always something that was just super important. Even when we moved out to Franklin, coming to Nashville and seeing shows or seeing free concerts that used to take place down at Riverfront and things like that. You know, there's so many. Ray Charles stands out as a big one. I came when I was in my early teens to see Ray play, and that was a pretty seminal moment, I think, for me. Yeah.
So was there a push and pull of, I live in Music City, I want to be a musician, and I'm turned off to it at the same time?
No, I don't think it was ever a negative thing for me.
Really?
I also don't know that I realized at the time it was probably as big an influence as it was. I think it wasn't until the last 3 or 4, maybe 5 years, even in the middle of making records, that it finally sort of dawned on me that it was kind of ingrained in who I was just from being around it so much. Not even just within my family, but just within the community. There's music everywhere you go.
So in college, when you had kind of aspirations to be a teacher and a basketball coach, how did that kind of transform into a passion for a career as a musician?
I don't know. It seemed so far off. I mean, looking back on it now, but I always had a huge love for music, like I say, just growing up, even from when I was a kid. Got a guitar when I was a senior in high school and started playing and trying to write songs and things like that. And then my first year of college was still pretty normal. And then I joined a band my second year of college, and it was evident pretty quick. It was really easy to miss class and really hard to miss band rehearsal. So I kind of switched courses and hadn't really looked back a whole lot since.
What was it like trying to get your name out there?
It's hard. I mean, it's weird because I sort of came about in a strange time. When I started in the late 90s, the music business was still much more, it was still more old school, I think, at that point. Radio was still such a huge factor, and the internet, it was really not at the level that it is now where people can connect with fans and things like that. So I came on at such a strange time. But that being said, I came on in that sort of transitional time when all of a sudden bands had websites, and then there was MySpace and Facebook and things like that. So it was a lot of work, and we did a lot of touring. So it was a strange mix of sort of, I guess, old school music business stuff and then this sort of new technology too. So, and I'm still trying to embrace that as much as I can.
With the touring, it seems like you've never really let up on that much. So what keeps you going night after night?
Well, that's the one thing we can control. We've slowed down a little bit. After the accident, there was obviously a slowdown. And then with kids, having 2 kids now, you know, actually wanting to be home is a strange thing because I spent, you know, the better part of just over a decade trying to stay gone from home as much as I could, consciously. And so it's a strange transition to sort of work back into that, trying to split the difference between the two. But it's been, that's the only thing you can control as a musician. Like, you can't really control, there's only so much control you can have over your relationship with a record company or with radio or anything like that. But the one thing I've always felt like we could have ultimate control over was that. We can go out and put on whatever live show we want. We can get people to come and see us and do that. So that's why it's always been so important. Like I say, I think it's the just direct link between the band and the fans.
Tell me a little bit about your fans. Like, what's unique about this breed of person?
I don't know. It's, you know, it's the most flattering thing I've ever been a part of. And, you know, I mean, there's bands that are certainly lots bigger and have more fans, but we have this core fan base that I can't say enough great things about. I mean, they're so supportive, and they let me and the band, it's not like we make the same record over and over. It's, you know, 7 records now, and we've made 7 pretty different records, and some have leaned more country, and some have leaned more rock, and some are overtly political, some are not that way at all. And it seemed like that group of people, we may lose a few on the fringes with each transition or things like that, but there's this core group that really sticks with us, and there's people that have seen 70, 80, 100 shows and things like that. And it's just, when you stop, I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about it, but when I do, and I realize how incredibly lucky we are to have the ability to do what we do for a living, and those people are solely responsible for that.
Yeah, so I didn't know you had kids. Tell me a little bit about your kids and how old they are.
I've got a 4-year-old, and my youngest will be 1 next month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's
both
awesome.
boys, and they are, they're nonstop. They have been, they're life-changing for sure.
Yeah. What do you think it'll be like for them growing up in a house with you?
I think it will be they'll be so, music will be such a benign thing with them. You know, I think that some kids, people will ask that sometimes, like, you think they'll grow up to be musicians or anything like that? I think they'll be so over it, they'll try to rebel and be bankers or something like that probably, so.
Right.
Yeah, I just have my fingers crossed for healthy and happy, and then we'll deal with the rest from there.
Yeah. So something I noticed just looking over your discography is that you have a lot of live records. What do you think is the magic of a live album?
I think it comes back to sort of that, what we talked about a second ago, with the band sort of changes a lot, and with each record, musically the show and the presentation changes, and I've always looked at those live records like, it's sort of just like a photograph of where the band was at this particular moment. We don't do those live records aren't, you know, a lot of times people talk about a live record and it's got a bunch of overdubs on it, and they've brought in crowd noise from another song and done all these different things, and our live records don't tend to be, they just are. They're actual just snapshots of the live show, and those fans that we talked about seem to enjoy that too.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I threw me off a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit about your accident. It's obviously a huge, factor in your life in music. So I guess I'm wondering, as you were first realizing what happened to you, like when you're waking up in the hospital or whatever that looked like, what was going through your head?
The first thing I did when I woke up, I didn't know where I was, and I felt like I was choking because they had put breathing tubes down for the 2 crushed lungs, but I couldn't see because I had these blinding kind of hemorrhages in both eyes. But I finally was able to get a nurse's attention and scribble down on a piece of paper, "wife and kid?" ? And that was the first time that then the nurse told me, she said, "wife and kid," she read it, and she said, "well, you've been in an accident on a motorcycle, you're in the hospital, your wife is here, and your family's fine." And I think I went back out for another day and a half or so, kind of right after that. But that was the biggest thing. I think that I was just, and that's one of those things that changes with family. I mean, now with kids and with a wife, it's just like all of a sudden, that becomes the most important thing in the world. And so that was such a relief. I think in a lot of ways that was my first bit of therapy, because that was sort of that first moment where I realized, like, okay, the most important things are okay. And they didn't get into all of the stuff that was done that I needed to do at that point, obviously. But then over the next few days, as I got consciousness back and started realizing all the things that were needing to be fixed and patched up and things like that, it was daunting, but I was so fortunate to be surrounded by a great family and friends and even fans. I mean, people that are fans of the band were coming to the hospital and things like that. So it turned into something that was, it would have been real easy to get negative about, but I was just surrounded by so many great people. I kind of would have felt like I was being selfish had I gotten incredibly negative. Because there's a lot of people, you're in an intensive care unit with 15 other people that are all in these beds and all at different levels, some a little worse, some a little better. But one of the guys didn't have any family there, he was from out of state, and so I think I can't sit around here and moan about how hard this is when I've got a dozen people surrounding my bed wanting to help me get better. So it was tough, and it was a tough, really, 2 years after that, trying to get everything back to normal. But it's, and it in some ways is still getting back to normal, but it's a process that I'll keep putting up with. Gas had gotten so expensive a few years back. I'd had it for 4 or 5 years probably when I was riding it. I didn't have a car, so that was my main mode of transportation. And I'd done a lot of riding on it, and I mean, it had always been safe. And then it's just one of those things that happens when somebody else isn't paying attention.
Was there a turning point where you felt like, now I'm back to normal, now my life is, going to of move forward?
Yeah, there were some moments, you know, I'd never let myself think that I wouldn't get back to some sense of normalcy. I realized early on that there were going to be some things that weren't ever going to really be the way they were before. I mean, just with the damage that was done to my leg and things like that, my leg modeling career was never going to work out. My track star career was never going to work out. I mean, there were certain things that were going to be different. I mean, in the way that I walked and things like that. And there was going to be pain, and there's going to be arthritis as I continue to grow. But yeah, there were moments as I got out of the hospital, and then had to transition from just being in a bed constantly to then eventually a wheelchair for months, and then a walker, then a cane. And there were little moments with each of those things where I felt like, finally at one point when I was in a wheelchair, and I just had one son at the time, and my wife and my oldest boy were able to leave the house and kind of leave me on my own, even just for, you know, 30 or 45 minutes. And I was finally able, my shoulders had healed enough that I could hold a guitar. And I remember just sitting in a wheelchair and just kind of trying to play and trying to sing again just by myself in the living room. And that was a pretty cathartic moment, I think, of realizing that it wasn't okay, but it would eventually be okay. You know, I could feel glimpses, I could hear glimpses of what my voice, I felt like, sounded like before, and I could feel things within my hands and things like that playing-wise that like I say, it was sort of one of those moments that I was like, okay, it is actually it'll be okay at some point.